Rachel, the young American tourist chasing a fresh start, and Kareem Al-Fahd, the 70-year-old Dubai oil magnate with a fortune built on power, seemed like an unlikely pair. Yet their affair would spiral into one of the most shocking crimes in recent history, ending not in love, but in death aboard his private jet. Rachel had always imagined herself living a life of luxury, yet the reality she faced in the United States was far from glamorous. Once a hopeful model with dreams of magazine covers and fashion campaigns, she had watched her career fade into nothing more than unpaid auditions and disappointing rejections. Bills piled up, and every call from the bank was a reminder of how far she had fallen. Friends had drifted away, and her family, tired of her borrowing money, stopped answering her messages. By the summer of 2019, she was desperate for a change, and Dubai appeared in her mind as the perfect escape. She had read about its glittering skyscrapers, endless shopping malls, and golden beaches. The city promised everything she felt was slipping out of her grasp: fame, fortune, and a chance to start over. Rachel booked her ticket with money she didn't have, using the last of her credit. As she stepped onto the plane, she convinced herself it wasn't running away but starting fresh. She pictured herself sipping champagne in rooftop bars, taking photographs that would make her followers jealous, and maybe even meeting someone who could help her climb back to the life she once dreamed of. The moment she arrived, the heat of the desert wrapped around her like a warning she ignored. Towering glass buildings reflected the sun, and luxury cars sped past as if no one in this city had ever known struggle. For Rachel, Dubai wasn't just a vacation. It was a stage, and she was determined to play her part. She didn't realize that the role she was about to take on would cost her more than she ever imagined, drawing her into a story that would end in death thousands of feet above the ground. Kareem Al-Fahd was a man who had spent his entire life building an empire, and by the time he turned 70, he had more wealth than most could ever dream of. Born into a modest family, he had climbed to the top through determination, calculated deals, and an instinct for oil ventures that turned desert land into rivers of gold. Over the decades, he transformed himself from a simple trader into one of Dubai's most powerful oil magnates. His name carried weight in business circles, and his presence commanded respect in every room he entered. Yet behind the polished image of a self-made billionaire, Kareem was also a man who feared growing old alone. Despite his age, he maintained the lifestyle of someone decades younger. His collection of cars included the rarest sports models, and his home stood like a modern palace on the coast, walls made of glass reflecting the Gulf waters. Art collectors, politicians, and celebrities attended his extravagant gatherings, drawn not only to his wealth but to his charm. Kareem liked to keep people guessing. One moment he was generous and warm, the next cold and calculating. It was this balance that made him so alluring to those who crossed his path. Still, Kareem carried secrets few knew. Age had begun to weigh on him, though he rarely admitted it. He filled the silence of his later years with constant activity, lavish dinners, and the company of younger companions who reminded him of the vitality he was losing. For every deal he signed and every luxury he purchased, there was a quiet emptiness he could not erase. His fortune had given him control over the outside world, but it could not shield him from the loneliness that haunted him behind the walls of his glass mansion. It was during one of Kareem's exclusive yacht parties that Rachel's path first crossed with his. The yacht itself was a floating palace, adorned with polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a deck lined with guests dressed in designer clothes. Influencers posed for cameras, businessmen clinked glasses over deals, and music drifted into the night air as the vessel sailed along the Gulf. Among the glittering crowd, Rachel felt out of place, but her striking looks and quiet demeanor quickly caught attention. She wasn't loud or desperate like many of the others who fought for a photograph with Kareem. Instead, she stood near the railing, letting the sea breeze play with her hair, and that difference made her stand out. Kareem noticed her almost instantly. He had grown used to people trying too hard to impress him, yet here was someone who seemed both hesitant and curious. Rachel, for her part, understood the power of appearing slightly out of reach. Their first interactions were brief, but they planted the seed of fascination. Soon, Rachel was invited to more gatherings, stepping further into a world she had only dreamed of. She was introduced to Kareem's circle of elite friends, tasted wines that cost more than her monthly rent back home, and was gifted expensive jewelry that she accepted with practiced gratitude. Every encounter deepened the connection. Kareem enjoyed the company of someone who didn't immediately treat him as a wallet, while Rachel learned how to play her role with precision. The yacht party became the beginning of something far more dangerous than either could predict. What started as a chance meeting between a struggling tourist and a wealthy magnate would spiral into a relationship built on charm, secrets, and hidden intentions that neither revealed openly. Rachel's life back in America was never far from her thoughts, even as she slipped into the glittering world Kareem offered. Every time she smiled at a new diamond bracelet or sat in the back of a luxury car, a part of her remembered the reality she had left behind: unpaid bills, threatening letters from creditors, and a constant fear of financial ruin. The temporary relief Kareem's gifts provided could not erase the mountain of debt pressing on her shoulders. She told herself she deserved this new life, that she had earned the chance to live without worry, yet she also knew it was not secure. Kareem's generosity was vast, but it was never enough to cover the black hole she had created in her past. The more time she spent in his world, the more she began to calculate. She noticed how his staff treated him with absolute obedience, how his fortune seemed limitless, and how his age made him vulnerable. Kareem was wealthy beyond imagination, but he was also mortal, a man living out his last years. Rachel's mind, once filled with the desire for fame, now turned to thoughts of inheritance and control. She wondered about his will, about what would happen to the billions tied to his name, and about whether she had a place in the future of his empire. Her charm, once a mask for survival, became a weapon she wielded with precision. She convinced herself that her situation justified every thought she entertained. If life had been kinder to her, she might not have needed to think this way. But life had not been kind, and Rachel had grown tired of waiting for luck to rescue her. Instead, she began to consider a plan of her own. Travel was one of Kareem's greatest pleasures, and his private jet was the crown jewel of his lifestyle. Unlike his yachts or cars, the jet represented freedom. No schedules, no waiting, only the sky stretching endlessly ahead. For Rachel, the invitation to join him on a trip to Europe felt like both an honor and an opportunity. She had already flown first class before, but this was different. The jet was lavish in a way she had never imagined: gold-plated fixtures, velvet-lined seats, and a dining table set with the finest crystal. Every detail whispered of power and exclusivity. To those around Kareem, the flight was nothing unusual, just another routine journey for a man who crossed continents as easily as others crossed streets. But for Rachel, the moment was heavy with meaning. She had begun to imagine scenarios in which this trip could change her life forever. In the enclosed space of the jet, Kareem would be away from his bodyguards, his staff, and the endless stream of people who shielded him. Here, thousands of feet above the ground, it would be just him, the crew, and her. The thought lingered in her mind long before takeoff. She studied the layout of the jet, memorized where food and drinks were stored, and watched how carefully the staff prepared each glass. To the others, she appeared fascinated by the luxury, but behind her polite smile, her thoughts were sharper, colder. She knew the opportunity she had been waiting for was drawing closer, and she reminded herself that such chances did not come twice. The flight, intended by Kareem as a romantic getaway, was beginning to feel to Rachel like the stage for an ending she had already written in her mind. The jet rose smoothly into the night sky, engines humming like a lullaby as the lights of Dubai disappeared beneath the clouds. Inside, the cabin glowed softly, the air filled with the scent of fine wine and exotic dishes prepared by a private chef. Kareem seemed relaxed, his jacket draped over the seat, his laughter echoing as he spoke of business deals and the European cities he loved to visit. To the crew, it looked like another ordinary flight, the powerful magnate enjoying the company of his beautiful companion. But Rachel's thoughts were far from ordinary. She had prepared herself carefully, slipping a small vial into her purse before boarding. The poison was tasteless, colorless, and chosen after weeks of research. Every moment of the flight, she replayed her plan in her head, waiting for the right time when no one would notice. As dinner was served, the opportunity arrived. Kareem raised his glass to toast the journey ahead, smiling at Rachel with the trust of a man who believed he was untouchable. With a steady hand and a practiced smile, she poured the contents of the vial into his drink. It blended instantly, leaving no trace. Kareem drank deeply, never suspecting the betrayal hidden within the crystal glass. Minutes later, his laughter softened, his hand trembled, and his face paled. The crew rushed to assist as he collapsed, believing age and exhaustion had finally caught up with him. To them, it was a sudden medical crisis, nothing more. But Rachel knew the truth as she clutched his arm, pretending to panic, her heart racing not with fear, but with the cold realization that the plan she had carried for weeks was now unfolding exactly as she had imagined. The cabin shifted from luxury to chaos in a matter of minutes. Kareem's breathing grew shallow, his skin turned ashen, and the once powerful magnate lay slumped in his seat as the flight crew scrambled to help. Oxygen masks were rushed to him, emergency calls made to the nearest airport, and the jet's calm, controlled environment spiraled into panic. Rachel clutched his hand tightly, her face painted with fear, her voice cracking as she begged the crew to do something. To anyone watching, she appeared the image of a heartbroken partner, unwilling to accept what was happening before her eyes. Inside, however, she was rehearsing her performance, making sure every gesture seemed natural. The pilot contacted ground control and requested permission for an emergency landing in Italy. Within moments, the jet descended sharply, its lights cutting through the night sky as it aimed for the nearest runway. Every second felt longer than the last. Rachel sat perfectly still beside Kareem, wiping tears from her cheeks while stealing glances at the crew to ensure they believed her grief. When the plane touched down, ambulances were already waiting. Kareem was rushed from the jet on a stretcher, paramedics working frantically as sirens wailed in the distance. Rachel followed, her designer dress stained with tears she forced herself to shed. At the hospital, doctors fought to revive him, but their efforts ended with a grim declaration. Kareem was gone. The official explanation seemed simple, an elderly man taken by a sudden heart attack in midair. Rachel wept in front of the doctors, convincing everyone that she was nothing more than a devastated woman who had just lost the man who had given her the world. For the moment, her act held strong. In the days following Kareem's death, sympathy poured in from across the world. Business partners, politicians, and celebrities released statements honoring the magnate's legacy. Newspapers printed glowing tributes, calling him a visionary who had shaped Dubai's rise. Rachel was photographed at the funeral, veiled in black, clutching flowers as cameras captured her grief-stricken face. To the public, she was the tragic partner who had lost the man she loved. Yet behind the scenes, questions were beginning to surface. Italian authorities, tasked with reviewing the circumstances of Kareem's sudden death, noticed details that did not align. A man of his wealth and resources had regular medical checkups and no history of heart problems. Why, then, had his life ended so abruptly at 38,000 feet? Autopsy results gave the first clue. Traces of a rare toxin were found in Kareem's bloodstream, something no doctor would expect in a natural death. Investigators expanded their search, digging into Rachel's background. What they uncovered painted a darker picture. In the weeks leading up to the flight, her internet history revealed searches for undetectable poisons and instructions on how to slip substances into drinks without leaving evidence. Surveillance footage from Dubai showed her visiting a discreet supplier known for selling chemicals under the table. The most damning evidence came from her phone records. Conversations with her sister hinted at desperation, with Rachel complaining about debts and speaking bitterly of how she needed Kareem's money to escape her problems. Combined, the evidence stripped away the mask she had worn so carefully. The grieving partner image crumbled, replaced by the portrait of a woman who had plotted her lover's death with cold calculation. The investigation was no longer about natural causes, but about premeditated murder. Rachel's arrest came quietly, far from the flashing cameras that had followed her since Kareem's death. Italian authorities moved swiftly once the evidence was compiled, taking her into custody before she could board a flight back to the United States. The news stunned the world. The woman who had been paraded as Kareem's grieving partner was now accused of orchestrating his murder. For many, it seemed like a story ripped from fiction, an American tourist entangled with one of Dubai's richest men, ending his life not out of love, but out of greed. The trial was swift and merciless. Prosecutors presented the toxicology reports, the surveillance footage, and the damning phone records. They painted Rachel as a woman who had carefully manipulated her way into Kareem's world, only to poison him when she saw her chance. Her defense team tried to argue that she was a victim of circumstance, that her debts and desperation had clouded her judgment, but the jury was unmoved. The calculated nature of her actions left little room for sympathy. When the verdict was read, Rachel was sentenced to life in prison, far from the luxury and freedom she had once craved. The woman who had dreamed of yachts, diamonds, and a place among the world's elite now faced endless days behind gray walls and iron bars. Kareem's fortune passed to his children, who made sure her name was erased from his legacy. What began as a dream vacation had ended as a cautionary tale. Behind the glittering promise of wealth and power, greed had exposed its darkest edge. Rachel's story became a chilling reminder that even in a world of unimaginable luxury, betrayal could bring everything crashing down thousands of feet above the earth.